Good evening, dear educators. On behalf of Kriti Prakashan Private Limited, I, Dr. Farzana Shakil Ali, welcome you all to this learning journey with Urja Pedagogy Enhancement Program, an initiative of Kriti Prakashan Private Limited. Kriti Prakashan Private Limited is a Lucknow based publishing company which began its operations in the year 2000. Having firm faith in its motto that is shaping nations through education, the company has spread its wings of knowledge pan India and abroad. Our vision statement also includes updation of teachers and educationists by empowering them through capacity building trainings and workshops twice a year. Our initiative, Urja Pedagogy Enhancement Program, focuses on empowering educators in teaching pedagogies in alignment with National Education Policy 2020, Learning Outcomes by NCERT, and Bloom's Taxonomy. We are glad to share that our Urja training series for the session 2021-22 has already started since 15th July 2021. Today we have capacity building workshop on pedagogy of teaching social science to the preparatory level, that is classes 3rd, 4th and 5th. I strongly believe that if you want your students to learn, then everyone in the school must continue to learn. Today, on 27th of July, Kriti Prakashan and Digi Nurture remember our former president, Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam, on his death anniversary. Dr. Kalam has said that the purpose of education is to make good human beings with skills and expertise. And enlightened human beings can be created by teachers. So, you and we, as educators and teachers, have huge responsibilities in doing this. And the best brains of the nation may be found on the last benches of the classroom. That's what NEP talks about. Know your student, know their hidden potential, and work on it. So, with these words, I welcome our today's resource person, Mr. Arun Prasad Wahi, to today's live webinar. Mr. Wahi is a gold medalist in geography at the master's level from the Kumaon University, Nainital, and he has been a popular teacher for social science at the secondary level and geography at the senior secondary level. After serving as a teacher for 1.5 decades, Mr. Wahi worked as a school principal before pursuing his passion to create teachers' resource material based on his subject knowledge and rich classroom experience. He has been a quiz master for over a decade. Mr. Wahi is currently an independent consultant for developing educational digital media and teachers' resource material, as well as a resource person for conducting teachers' workshops. We welcome you on board, Mr. Arun Prasad Wahi, and we look forward to an enriching and enlightening session with you on social science teaching pedagogy. Over to you, Mr. Arun Prasad Wahi.
So nice to have introduced me so very well. And you said that today is a day to remember Dr. APJ Kalam. And my presentation today begins with what he said to the primary teachers. So with your permission, I begin with the introductory slide telling you about what was said by APJ Kalam. He said, creativity is the key to success in the future, and primary education is where teachers can bring creativity in the children at that level. So, as we are aware, formative years begin at the primary level, and the NEP 2020 also highlights the same thing. So we begin with this teachers training module, and this training is about preparing you to hit the target at the bull's eye, as you can see here in my slide. And in fact, if we have a look at the NEP 2020, we will see that many of the things have been either changed or, in fact, broadened in their perspective in reference to the NCF 2005. Because at that time we had a summative and formative assessment, but all this has been done away with. And the spirit of the NCF 2005 has been modified and updated very nicely in the NCP 2020. So, as you will see here, there are 12 key points of my training program. The first key point is the icebreaker when you begin, what you should know and what you don't know. And then the second point would be the relevance of studying the subject. We shall be taking up a third point as approaches to the study and teaching, and then the strategy and the pedagogy that we are going to use, how we are going to plan our lessons, and then the integrated approach, that is linking the subjects together. Then we move on to the learning objectives, and from the learning objectives, we move on to designing activities for experiential learning, which is a very important part of the NEP 2020. And then we move on to two segments of assessing for learning and assessing the learning done by the children. And then how to get a quick feedback, then the smart resource and time management, how we are going to do that. And eventually we will end with tips on coping up with challenges. So we begin, and the very first thing is that what are the main key points for teachers in the NEP 2020. So we have a lot of books, but the main key points are what is our aim? And the aim is preparing holistic and well-rounded individuals equipped with 21st century skills. Now, here I would like to just elaborate slightly that what happens is that with time, things keep changing. And the perspective that we had in the 20th century, at that point of time when I was a student, I had never thought that we will be learning with audiovisual. The only audiovisual that came into existence was somewhere around the late 80s, where certain high-level schools used to have projectors and slide projectors to be, and that all that thing was shown to the children. But here we are training the children for the 21st century. So we have to keep this in mind that the child who comes to you at the primary level has been seeing a mobile and playing with it at home before he comes to school. So our aim is to prepare preparing holistic and well-rounded individuals equipped with 21st century skills. And therefore, our teaching has to be interactive with fun, creative, collaborative, especially for experiential learning. What we normally say is learning by doing. So here, our role, as it used to be in olden days, that we stand, at the head, at the pedestal, and we say, "Children, now listen to me." So it's not like that. We shake hands with the children. So, "Hi, children, are you ready to listen to what I'm saying? Here's something very nice for you." Now, the study here is also to be reduced to core essentials and focusing only on the key concepts, and especially focusing on application. There is another very important point that is coming up, and that is the language. Now, the NEP 2020 is very, very clear about the language, especially while teaching social science and even, in fact, other subjects. You have to be bilingual. Here, the concept is now we are not going to immerse the child into English so that he turns out to be speaking good English all the time. Here, the idea is that if he or she has to study social science, then in that case, he has to understand. He has to, make a mental note of things that is happening. If it goes above his head, if the language is not compatible with what he is understanding, then it is useless. It is a facile exercise. Therefore, bilingual communication using local or home language is also necessary. तो आप अगर हिंदी भाषी जगह पर हैं तो आप हिंदी में पढ़ा सकते हैं, टर्म्स को आप इंग्लिश में यूज करेंगे जैसा कि मैं अभी कर रहा हूँ, मगर जो चीज बच्चे के समझ में आ सके वो भाषा हमको इस्तेमाल करनी है. Now the next point is that NEP 2020 says that we have to integrate, has to be an integration of Indian culture in the teaching process. So wherever possible, wherever there is a reflection required of the culture, it has to be brought out on in focus, and the child has to be educated about it. And something interesting for the children but difficult for the teachers is the outings. So educational visits, enrichment activities, quizzes, arts, crafts, etc. have to be included in the teaching process. So outing is a little difficult, especially when for the teachers, because you cannot take too many children out, and there are so many difficulties that we all know. But I'll deal with this a little later when we move on to the next important thing, and that is what are the icebreakers which you will be using to link the subject or to familiarize the subject with the children. The first one or the first point is guess. What, for example, what is the meaning of environment? Here I've taken one example for each of the points. So let us say, what is the meaning of environment? So you ask the children, what is the meaning of environment? You get 101 answers. And from this, you have to wean out what is the best possible thing. And you also have to make your, put it in your mind to make a strategy to use those directives which come out by asking this kind of a question as to what is the meaning of environment. Now, the next thing is that you have to know what all does one learn when studying social science. So the child has to know, and you have to ensure that the child begins to know that what all he or she is going to study when he learns social science. The third point is to understand. And what are the sources of understanding? For example, what are the sources of understanding our environment? Now, there are so many sources around a child, and how he or she can understand the environment and relate it to the subject, that is important. The fourth thing is that he has to learn, other than the school, how all do we learn social science? So social science is not what we are going to teach at school only, but social science is also something that the child learns at home. So the child should know that if a certain thing is being told to him in respect to, let us say, the family, or in respect to where he's staying, that is related to his subject, social science. And then finally, the last point is to analyze what role do the family members and neighbors and friends play in understanding our environment. So the interaction that the child has at home, in the family, among friends, and then among members and neighbors, how they contribute to little things which are actually part of social science. So this is how we have to connect with the child. Now, the next thing that we move on to is what is the relevance of studying social science. So the social science moves between, it's a road, and this road crosses different points. So in my slide, you can see here that these are the points coming up, and then this is the road that is going to connect. So the first point is, what does one stand to gain by learning social science? So the child has to be told that how the subject social science would be useful not only now but even later. So for in the present perspective, how social science is going to help the child, I'll just give you an example. In the younger classes, if the child knows his way from school to home, that is also part of social science. So he knows the geography of that place. Now, the next point that this road touches is how does one keep updated by learning social science? So, you are learning a few things here and there, but the child doesn't know that this is also part of social science. So you have to integrate this. And you says that you keep yourself updated, because if you know your way from, let us say, home to school, In fact, you know the geography of that part, and so you are updated by learning social science. Then the third pillar is, or the point is, that how one improves the understanding about various aspects of day to day life. So, different aspects of day to day life are also understood or comprehended by studying social science. So, we have to elaborate on this. And then, how may one establish the interrelation between various aspects of the environment, natural, social, and cultural? So, about natural environment, I think the child begins to know that he's seen parks, he has seen the road, he has seen greenery, and etc etc. And then the social environment, he knows his family, the child knows about neighborhood. And then the cultural environment, as to he listens to music, or he sees videos or films. So all these are interrelated, and these things have progressed with the development of mankind. So all this has to be related in such a way that the child begins to appreciate the relevance of studying social science. And the last point here is, how best can one connect experiences with course content? This is what I have been explaining to you from point one. So between point one and to point five, this road is very, very interesting. And this has to be kept in mind while you are teaching. We move on to the next slide. And here are the approaches. We have just seen the relevance of studying social science, and now we move on to the approaches. And let us see how we see the approaches. The first point here is to relate. So you have to relate facts and current affairs known to students with the subject knowledge. This is an approach. You ask the child what he knows, and you have to relate it with the subject. The second point is to show relevant media presentation to align the focus of the student with the subject. Now, this is the requirement of the NEP 2020, that you have to present, you have to show a media presentation to focus the child on the subject. And then you have to provide facts to develop that I want to know more, curiosity about the subject in the students. Okay, so what you are teaching in class should bring about that curiosity, that the child should be able to say uh, that, yes, teacher, I want to know more. And then the fourth point is to initiate a brief class discussion on varied ideas of the subject with the student. So you have to initiate a class discussion. Now, there will be two things: class discussion, and class discussion is under your control, and then group activity. We'll be discussing this a little later. And so I come on to the fifth point, that we summarize the subject content in sync with the approaches. So the subject content is summarized with how you have related, what you have shown, what you have provided, and what is the initiative. We move on to the next slide now. And this slide is about strategy and pedagogy. And this is the first part of the strategy and pedagogy. Now, the effective strategy needs to be in sync with the guidelines laid down in the NEP 2020. This is something, once again, this is a reminder that you have to keep this in mind, that your teaching has to be bilingual approach. तो हिंदी का बहिष्कार न करें, हिंदी को आत्मसार करें हिंदी का, और उसको साथ लेकर चलें. In fact, I would like to remind you here that in the 80s, late 80s, the Kendriya Vidyalaya had started teaching social science in the Hindi medium, because children were having difficulty in understanding in English. But however, we have a constraint. If we begin in teaching in the Hindi medium, it would be difficult for the teacher to teach also, and there would be a dichotomy. But we can always have a bilingual approach. The moment you feel that the child or the children, a segment of children, are not understanding, you can always switch over to the local language, and you can lay emphasis on local language. Now, the second point here is digital. So introduce the digital face of the subject, such as You give examples such as weather forecasting. Now, digital face of the subject doesn't mean that we are doing a class through computers. That is a digital interface. That is a digital interface for everything. But as far as the subject is concerned, what are the benchmarks in digitalization of the subject? And so, for example, weather forecasting. Now, weather forecasting is something we learn about the weather in social science. We learn about the weather in geography at the later stage, in between 6 to 8 classes and even beyond. So this is weather forecasting is now based on digitalization. Then the third point is to interlink. Now highlight the interlink between social science and other subjects. I'll just give you a very brief example. And this example is that children are aware of uh, the subject in science, etc., where they are being taught about plants. Now, the needs of the plants, that is, air, water, soil, rain, etc., etc., all these needs we discuss in social science. So, what the child is studying in biological sciences is about the benefits of the plant, is about how the plant is useful to us to eat or something, or to for ornamentation, whatever. But the plant is growing in the natural environment, and the natural environment is being studied here in social science. So we need to interlink. Like this, there will be, I'm just taking one or two odd incidences, but there are so many incidents where we can interlink our subject with whatever the child is studying in different other classes. Now, then the last point is analytical. Now we have to create space for analytical based, we have to create space for analytical based learning and critical thinking. Now, analysis based learning or analytical learning can only take place when the subject matter is comprehended well, when an interlink is established, and when the approach is bilingual and the child is able to understand each and everything that you are communicating. So, with this, we move on to the next segment of strategy and pedagogy. And let us see what we have here. And we have suggested pedagogy to meet the NEP 2020 strategy commitments. So this is a suggested pedagogy. It is coming up on your screen now. The number one point is reference. Use net references to augment standard pedagogy. Now here, this is going to take some of your time. Unfortunately, it will not be like what it used to be in my time, that we knew the book by heart, starting from whatever class we were teaching and going right up to class 12. Most of the things were known to us, because in 2 years of teaching, you can probably, you will know everything that is there in your book and where it is written in the book. So those days are gone. You don't just depend on the textbook. Textbook is only a segment is to be used, and references are very, very important, because now we have a plethora of references available on the net, and we have to train the child according to the 21st century digital needs. So if we initiate this in different subjects at different levels, we are actually developing the child in a holistic manner. So references, you have to take up the references one after the other, and you have to cite them. You would be surprised if you start looking at the YouTube. It is full of material, but as a subject teacher, you have to wean out those things which are relevant to your children, and you have to show them. And now we move on to the next point, and that is group study. Now, in group study, excuse me, we have to divide the class into 5 or 6 children and into groups. So 5, 6 children make one group, another 5, 6 children make another group, and so a batch of 30 children would make about 5, 6 groups. So 5 to 6 groups are there in one class, and each group has a group leader. Now, this kind of pedagogy was used uh, many years ago, maybe I think 2 decades ago, while teaching English, and it was very successful. And in fact, this pedagogy can be used for all subjects, especially in social sciences, because it is very, very relevant to use group study. So we make groups, and what we do is that we segment our lesson into 5 parts and we give each part to each group. So while you are teaching, one part has the responsibility of taking out the details of that particular part. That group is working on that part. Second group is working on the second part of the chapter, and so on. And finally, we have a meeting in which you have to conduct the discussion, and each group would fit in or would bring in their segment of research and knowledge. So, as you can see here in this visual, this is like a jigsaw puzzle. So, group study is also like a jigsaw puzzle. Different groups are doing different things and they interconnect. Now, the third point here in my jigsaw puzzle, and that is to illustrate. So, you have to use videos, you have to use documentaries, you have to use vlogs, travel vlogs on life in the metros. I've taken this example, I think, from the class 5 book, and famous people, etc. This is once again from class 5. So you have to illustrate this. This can be taken as an out of the book study. And then we have to do field study. You have to organize visits to monuments, museums, markets, etc. for experiential learning. Now, this, as I said earlier, is going to make life difficult for teachers. So here we have a suggestion, and that suggestion is that we can have, you know, we can have groups, one group at a time, going out with the teacher for 20-30 minutes to a nearby place. And then a week later, a second group can go to another place. Third group can go to another place. And finally, when we meet and collaborate, we share our experiences in the presence. The children share their experiences in the presence of the teacher. And you have to coordinate. And the fifth point here is to plan activities, enrichment activities such as quizzes, poster making, songs, skits, etc., with which you are all familiar. I don't need to elaborate at this point. And we move on to the next item. So here we are, and that is lesson planning. So let's have a look at the lesson planning. Now, in the NEP 2020 guidelines, other than standard operational procedure of lesson planning, there are certain inclusions which are needed. Now, this is once again a repetition of what you have seen a little earlier. And this initiates, once again talks about group discussion. So, group discussion, we have our group study. So there are 2 points, two things here. One of them is group study, and the other is group discussion. The group discussion, in fact, is related to when you related to a training which you deal with when you deal with just one group, and you discuss their segment of the study. And then group study is when you connect the studies done by different groups together and come to a conclusion, so that each and every child has the advantage of having hands-on working on the lesson. So he or she is happy to know or happy to appreciate that he or she has contributed in developing the lesson along with. Then the second point here is the use of multimedia. So use suitable reference and multimedia clips to augment textual content is very necessary. Once again, references from the net such as Wikipedia, Government of India. Now this is very interesting. I'd like to point out here that the Government of India also has a number of things for children. In this government, we have a number of things for children, and they are all available. So you have to access and see what is available to you. And then, as I said earlier, also that YouTube is a Pandora's box. All you need to do is to wean out and take the useful things. Now, the fourth point here is assignments. So this is something which you have been doing before also. So assignments is to prepare assignments involving real life information from family, community, in sync with the text. For example, you are teaching about family or you're teaching about neighborhood or whatever. So what you can do is you can give an exercise to the children to interview their family or to interview their neighbors on certain common points. Now, this can be given as an individual assignment and then you can interchange. This can also be developed as a group activity. Now, the last point here, the fifth and the last point here is use local names. List local names for objects, materials, places that appear in the text. I've given an example here, pumpkin. Pumpkin is kaddu, it is also kumla, it is also sitapal. So it all depends on what is being used in your area. You should be familiar with the language of the streets and the language of the neighborhood, and you should use that language so that the child feels comfortable and the child is able to express without the fear or phobia of being rejected. Because if he says kaddu, or if you are saying kaddu in Hindi and he says kumla, he says, what the hell is kumla? It is either kaddu or this pumpkin. No, you have to accept that it is also called kumla, it is also called sita. So this is the essence of the NEP 2020. We move on to the next slide now. And here we move on to the integrated approach. So let us see how we can integrate. I have taken certain, uh, limited examples because we have a limited amount of time and we cannot have everything here. So we shall be taking these examples and one by one, and let us see how well I am able to communicate this thing to you. Now, the first point here is about the natural environment. So, knowledge of the evolution of man in relation to our forests and wildlife. Now, I think in classes 3, classes 4, if I remember correctly, uh, the evolution of man, story of mankind, or the historical story of mankind is there. So, the evolution of mankind in relation to the natural environment. So, as the environment continued to change, evolution of man kept on taking place. Okay. Now, when you are talking of the natural environment, the same thing has been studied by the child in science. So, while he is studying social science, you are trying to relate what he has studied in science with what he is studying in social science. So, this is a kind of an integrated approach. Excuse me. Now, the next point that I've taken here is government institutions. The connection of our government with institutions of the local self-government. Now, here, what I mean to say is, or what I mean to point out here is, that the child would be knowing by default that who is the President of India. But the President of India cannot be seen at the local level. At the local level, there is a municipality. At the local level, there is a police. So there has to be a relation. So the connection between the government at the center and the connection between the government at the state and the government at the local level that the child is seeing, that is what is called as integration. Because if we talk about, that, okay, this is the police, and when we talk about the army, so the army is something which the president orders, but the police is something which the chief minister orders. So there has to be a relation between the two, and the child should know the relation. And this is how, different aspects or sorted out or spread out aspects can be integrated. Now, in case of economy, the connection of social science with food production and manufacturing industry. So while food and the use of food is being taught in science, how food is helpful to us in growing, etc., etc., all this is part of the science. But at the same time, production of food and farmers, they have an earning to make from this. This is part of the economy. So the subject of economy or economics is integrated with social science. Now the fourth point here is trade and transport. Now integration with transport and trade needed to provide essential commodities in daily life. We all know that the The trucks and the aeroplanes and even the ships, etc., are used for trading. They carry commodities from one place to the other. We are teaching in somewhere down the line in our subject that when we have to travel very far out distances, we use an aeroplane, and when we have to travel slightly far out distances, we use a car, and when we also travel by train, and then goods are transported mainly by ship, etc. So all these things, the trade and transport, are interrelated, and they are integrated because what we are getting at our doorstep, what we are getting at the uh, grocery store, the perchun ki dukan, is coming through trade and transport, and this is part of the study of social science. Now, then we move on to the fifth point, and that is world peace. So, integration of social science with international social and political order as maintained by the United Nations. So, we will be the United Nations is part of their syllabus. It is part of social science, but it has to be integrated. It has to be brought in. I mean, in purview of the social science subject, we cannot have something like United Nations. So United Nations is something which is something imaginative. The child cannot conceive an idea of this. So therefore, it has to be brought to his level where he can appreciate the role of the United Nations. And for this, we would be needing referencing. For this, we would be needing to show documentaries. For this, we would be needing to integrate uh, international relations in our social science, bringing it down to the level of the child. And finally, the sixth point, very, very important these days, and that is health and well-being. So when we say that you have to stay healthy, and you have to practice social distancing, and you have to be very, very careful because the virus is spreading, etc., etc. But at the same time, how is it related to social science? So health and hygiene is also an important part of social science. While it is being taught in sciences, it is an integral part of social science because it is related to you know group activities as a family, as a society, as people who are moving, uh, as economic activities going on. For example, children are moving to playgrounds, or adults are moving to offices. So this is related, health and well-being. And then the government is providing health centers and hospitals for at different levels. So all this is interrelated, and therefore an integrated approach has to be done. Whatever you are teaching has to be brought down to the level of the child before we talk of big things in front of it. So with this, we move on to the next slide. And the coming slide is about learning objectives. I'm sorry, this slide may not show very well because of certain digital constraints. You will have a little bit of overlapping coming on to the slides. And as per the NEP 2020, the learning objective of social science should not just be defining terms or reciting or writing explanation of a historical or a social process. Students should be able to understand and should be able to analyze. Now let's see. I've taken certain examples. Now, in understanding, here's the question coming up: how the study of archaeology has been able to reconstruct the story of primitive man. So we keep reciting the story of primitive man. And we say man was like this, he was without clothes, and he started, wrapping himself with animal skins and leaves, etc. And on it, we keep on moving like this. But how we have been able to reconstruct all this, the child should be able to understand. So, what are archaeological evidences and how they are used to reconstruct? This is something which the child should be able to understand at his level. Don't think that it is something too big that you cannot explain. Now, once again, in class 3 for analysis, at the B side on the right side of the slide, you can see what causes have led to the diversity in food and clothing in different parts of India. So, this is again, I have taken this from a class 3 book. Now, the student should be able to analyze that why we are wearing dhotis in the south, men are wearing dhotis in the south in a different way altogether. And this, while in the mountains, the people are wearing, tight fitting pajamas or maybe firangs in Kashmir. Why is there a change? So analysis should be done by the child, because before he enters into the class 3 level, in class 1 and 2, the child has already been taught that in summers you wear cotton clothes and in winter you wear woolen clothes. So we have to develop on that. So the child should be able to analyze. Now, moving on to class 4, in understanding, the northern states of India have intense winters as compared to the south of India. Why? Now, the child should understand at class 4 level, it is being taught, and he or she should be able to understand that while the southern part is closer to the equator and it has an equatorial kind of a climate, the northern part, excuse me, is northern part is beyond the tropic, and therefore it is colder. Now, at the analysis level, we have another question here: how our duties are also important as much as our rights. Now, this is an analytical question. We talk about fundamental rights in class 4. Also, we tell that okay, it is your right, freedom is the right, or whatever. But what are our duties? So rights are, you know, on one side of the coin, and duties are the other side of the coin. Now, this is something which the child should analyze. And how will the child analyze? Because with, if there is a freedom, there are certain, obligations. And if you approach the child in such a way that he is able to understand the obligation, then the duty and the rights as two sides of the coin, the child will be able to analyze. Now, moving on to class 5, I'm reading out the question on the understanding side: how knowledge has grown immensely since the early 20th century. Now, since the early 20th century and the Renaissance, knowledge has grown immensely. In fact, Renaissance was a little before, a couple of centuries before, but by the 20th century, knowledge had grown very vastly, and the amount of development that has taken place between the 19th and the 20th century had not taken place for in the past 300-400 years. Now, the child should be able to understand why and how this has happened. How this has happened is because of scientific development and because of integration, because of a holistic understanding. And then we move on to the analysis in class 5, that how the political system of India is integrated between the states and the central government. So here, the child should be able to understand, as I said earlier, that while the army is controlled by the president and on the directions of the home minister and the parliament, the police is controlled by the chief minister and the state assembly. So this is a home minister at the state level. So this is once again analysis. The child should be able to analyze, and he should comprehend properly that there is a state list, a union list, and a concurrent list. This is something which you communicate, and the child should be able to analyze. With this, we move on to the next slide, and this is designing subject enrichment activities for experiential learning. So, how we are going to design experiential learning activities, enrichment activities. At the class 3 level, we preparing a picture scrapbook and a PowerPoint presentation on Indian festivals and clothing of India to be conducted as a group activity. So, a picture scrapbook can be made by class 3 experiential learning. The child will be cutting out images from different sources, magazines, etc. Make sure that the child does not buy things. He is able to recycle some of the used magazines, etc. So the topics that are given to the child for experiential learning should be in such a manner that they should be available to the child without incurring costs on the parents. Then the child can make PowerPoint presentation. Now, in class 3, I can understand that the child may not be able to make a PowerPoint presentation completely, but with the help of teachers and with the help of other group members, if you make a group, for example, 4 or 5 children can make a group. And as I said, I've been stressing on group activity that 4 or 5 children, they can collect pictures and they can slowly put it on. You have to teach them how to put it on a slide. And even if they show their slide with a few pictures spread out here and there, and they can speak 3, 4, 5 words as a group, one after the other, I think experiential learning is taking. So this is just one of the examples. In the same manner, there can be several other examples which you can initiate some of them yourself. And if need be, you are always welcome to write to me. I can suggest something, or you can write to DigiNurture. They will tell you, or they will direct your query to me. Now, in class 4 level, I have put in an example here that listing of mineral and water resources of India and making a collage on a wall map of India. So this is an experiential learning activity which I think can be used very comfortably. So what you do is you make a wall map. Now for this, what you can do is you have to trace out a wall map by yourself. As a teacher, you have to do this. And then this outline tracing can be given to the children on card sheet paper. The children would be marking, or in fact, they would be collecting pictures of minerals, and they will be placing those pictures at the places where these minerals are found. Now, this kind of an activity, or even water resources, or power resources, you can have different maps, and collages can be made with the cutting of pictures of the resources, and pasted properly on the map, showing where these locations are. And then you can also ask the children to write down the names of the places or the areas where they have pasted these minerals or water resources pictures on the map itself. And this can be used as a ready reckoner, and it can be used in revision. At the time of revision, this can be taken out, and the children will remember, oh yes, I pasted this and this is found. So mica, if it is, we are talking of mica, it is found here. If we are talking of iron ore, it is found here. And they put their fingers on the map, here, 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 like. Now moving on to class 5, I have given an example here, mapping the centers of the struggle for independence, that is 1857, with pictures of key freedom fighters of that place. Slightly difficult. It would need your guiding or guideline. But once again, the same activity, if you trace out a map and give it to them, give it to the children in the class, and they can, paste the pictures of freedom fighters in their original places. If they are talking of Jhansi ki Rani, Lakshmi Bai, then they should know where Jhansi is, where Kalpi is, and where Gwalior is. So this is how they are going to work and paste this on the map. Now, once they paste this on the map, this can be used for revision or other activities. So these are some of my suggestions. There would be different, activities, experiential learnings can be designed for different topics. In the purview of this particular webinar, I cannot take up everything, but I can just give you the basic guidelines and directives. If you need and you decide to make something and you get held up somewhere, please do get reconnect with me sometime later, and I think I can be able to guide you. We move on to the next thing, and that is the assessing for learning, which is in two parts: assessing for learning and assessing the learning. So the first thing that is coming up is assessing for learning. Now here we have to create questions that allow assessing the student's inherent knowledge about the topic to be taught. So this is before you begin with the chapter, you can give certain questions. I just read out a question to you, and you can read out the slide yourself. How is life in the metros different from other towns and cities in India? Now this is a question. On the right side, you will see a circle with 3 written there, and you will hold a class discussion or group activity to enable students to share. Now, remember, if you are holding a class discussion, you are moderating, and the children will be, you know, giving their views, and you have to, at each point of time, you have to, moderate, you have to correct them, and there would also be, some children who would agree, and others would be raising their hands that no, 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 ma'am, sir, ma'am, please, not this. This is more important. That is more important. So it needs to be done in a very controlled manner. But if you give it as a group activity, I think it is more successful, because in the group activity you give this particular question, and the children, 5 children in a group, they will rack their brains, and they will come with perfect answers or different points. How life in the metros is different, they will have not one, but they will have at least 10, 15 points, and they can speak one by one. So questions like this, different questions will be given to different groups, and an assessment for learning can be made. Now we move on to class 4, I think. How are the natural resources such as water, agriculture, and forests interrelated? Again, hold a class discussion or a group activity on natural resources. So, natural resources such as water is related to agriculture and to forests. All these are interrelated because growing plants have the same requirement. And this is also related to what they are learning in science. So if they have learned it in science, I think they should be able to answer this question, and they should be able to develop not one but several points on this question. Now the next point is, or for class 5, it is the question is: the Indian uprising of 1857 is called as a revolt by the British and called the first war of independence by Indians. Why? Now, a very important thing here is that we, in this question, we are linking our culture, or we are linking our, you can say, nationality. Because when we talk of the first war of when we call it first war of independence, it is that the people of India had jointly fought against the British to get rid of the British rule. But if you take it from a point of view, another point of view in history, it is called as a revolt. This is what the British call it, because the British were ruling the country, and while the Indians were disobeying their order, it was, and they were not following orders of the British, it was a revolt. So the difference between the war of independence and revolt has to be understood. And if the child is able to understand this, and in a class discussion, if you can say hold a class discussion or a group activity on the role of the revolt of 1857 in the independence of India, if you do that, then the children will be able to understand why it is called as a revolt by the British and why we call it as the first war of independence. So this is the assessing for learning. Now we move on to the next segment, and that is assessing the learning. Once the teaching has been done, After the concept of phenomena has been taught and discussed well with the students, test their reasoning and application with such questions. So in class 3, early man lived in other animals as other animals and slowly learned to make fire, tools, and live in caves. How did the discovery of the wheel change the life of early man? Now, if the child is able to explain this in his own words, that how wheel made a difference to the life of early man, I think your teaching has been successful. Similarly, in class 4, what is the most important resource of India and how are we developing? The most important resource of India, what it is, and how we are developing. Now, there would be, there may be several, there may be a difference of opinion between children that which is the most important resource. So here you have to use your judgment to tell them that this is more important, this is more important, that is less important, and so on and so forth. Now, in class 5, how are maps more useful than globes? And where are maps useful? So, if the child is able to tell you where maps are useful, maps are they are useful to this thing. How they are useful to more useful than globes is certainly important, and they will be able to understand. But how where maps are used, if the child is able to explain this, then I think your teaching has really been successful. In the next slide, we take a quick feedback to confirm how learning has taken place. So devise some multiple choice questions on knowledge, understanding, application, and skill. That is KUAS. Hmm. Now devise some multiple choice questions on KUAS with K share not exceeding 30 to 40% of the total questions. And it is suggested that you use a computer-based online test if possible. Now, here I would just like to point out very quickly, we are, I think, about to end. The time is almost finishing, so I have to speed up. That I want to point out is that if you do a little bit of research work, you will be able to construct an online test on a very simple PowerPoint presentation. It is very simple. I cannot tell you the technique now, but definitely if you ask me sometime later, I think I'll be able to tell you. So here we have a quick look at it. The suggested feedback methods are that you make an assessment by exchanging the answer sheets among the students and making them mark the sheets based on the answer that you call up. So what you are going to do is that the children are going to take a test, an exam, and they are going to write one word or one sentence, or multiple choice questions. They are going to mark A, B, C, D. And what you do is you exchange copies. So and different children will have copies of other children and they will keep marking and you keep telling them the answer. So you involve them also and you get a feedback also. Then filter out the students on the basis of their KUAS scores. So knowledge, understanding, application scores, how they are, you filter them out. And then students who do not perform well in the understanding and application segments must be attached with student tutors selected by you in the class. So way to do, overcome this difficulty is that understanding an application segment may not be very well taken up by children. So what you do is you provide children tutors to teach their own friends and then conduct a quiz on the same topic in lesson for improvement and reinforcement. So now comes the almost the last point or the second last point. What are the means of smart management of resources and time? So there are four things I would like to share with you. As you can see here in this, the first point is ensure. Now, always ensure that your class transactions are well planned and rehearsed thoroughly, especially when you are using digital content. Please remember, if you're for example, you are using a digital content and the thing doesn't work, and the mic doesn't work, or the sound doesn't work, or the picture disappears, everything or all attention span is lost. So you have to ensure that your class transactions are absolutely planned. Second, you have to augment the chalk and talk pedagogy with group activities, class quizzes, digital content display, and online reference. I think I've stressed heavily on this because that is the need, or that is the basic guideline in the NEP 2020. The third point is to involve students in preparing quizzes and digital content such as collecting online references and presentations. So you ask the children in class 5, etc. to make presentations for you. Even you can begin with class 3, modest beginning with class 3, and you can slowly move up. And I think the social science presentations are very, very interesting because they have a lot of pictures and children would enjoy making them, and they will also enjoy making posters. And then enforce strict time management during quizzing and group activities. So group activities, children would take you for a ride if you are in a live class. But if you are on online, it's a different concept altogether. But when the children are actually sitting in front of you, they may eat up your time. So you have to be very, very, you know, time conscious, and you have to enforce time management. And now we move on to the last slide of today, and that is how to cope up with challenges. Now, the first point here is browse the web for references regularly at pace with the academic calendar. So you have to browse the web regularly and to keep on collecting, your URLs and show them to the children. This keeps changing with time. It is not like, one fine day I made a drawing and I keep showing it for the next 5 years. Every year, the children see the same drawing. And when, class 3 children go to class 4 and class 4 children go to class 5, so the class 5 children will tell class 3, oh, ma'am, we showed you that picture that she showed me also when I was in class. So you have to browse the web regularly in pace with the academic calendar. B part is to collect all materials of the class, all materials to be used in the class transaction at the time of lesson plan. So all your materials should be ready at the time of lesson planning, and encourage students, especially of classes 4 and 5, to undertake online quizzes hosted by the government through their website. I've given you the website. It is quiz.mygov.in. You can read it in the screen here. HTTPS, of course, is common. Then quiz.mygov.in. The government gives you quizzes, and the children, especially of class 4 and 5, can take certain quizzes, but you have to tell them which quiz they have to undertake. And with this, I think we move on to a big thank you. As you can see here, that you can send me a mail personally also, and you can communicate with DigiNurture. If you have any difficulty, we would always be there to help you, to answer your queries, and to take your feedback. So with this, I extend my thanks to Shri Arvindji, who is the Managing Director and the Chairman of the Kriti Group of Companies, for having organized this kind of a workshop for teachers. I wish to thank him also for having invited me to address you all, and I am very sure that in due course of time you'll stand to gain with this. And as I said, it is a continuous process, and I'm very sure that DigiNurture would always be there to connect with you in case you require any assistance in pursuing your endeavor to follow the NEP 2020. So Farzana ma'am, thank you very much for having introduced me. And with this, we come to an end of today's workshop.
Thank you so much, Mr. Arun Prasad Wahi. I literally enjoyed each and every word delivered by you. That was really, you know, a reflection of how to teach social science, though all teachers who were attending today were social science teachers, but now your presentation will lead them to reflect on their teaching pedagogies and will certainly bring improvement and a transformed classroom. So, with all these words, I thank all the participants for the day, and may God bless us all. Happy learning to all of you. Thank you. Thank you so much.